Why are so many Americans calling for the dismantling of the Department of Education? Former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos has really good answers. While America's school system has made little progress over the last 175 years, the teachers' unions have amassed more power than any other group in America. Parents are waking up and demanding better options for our kids. This conversation gives a roadmap on how to get there. Betsy, I think that you're probably the most famous education secretary in America, maybe even the world. And it is not necessarily because you were out to be famous, but the teachers' unions hated you so much that they decided to make you famous, which probably means that you did a lot of good things.
I hope we did. I know we did. We focused on doing the right thing for children, and that was anathema to the teachers' unions and all of their allies.
Well, what I learned, especially in the type of work that we do in advocating for children, is that we need to be okay with the labels and the pushback because there is real evil that is happening against our children. And people are willing to go to really far ends to, just lie and attack and scare. I mean, I've been in many situations where I was scared, and I know you had to hire people to protect you. And it is crazy, the type of attacks that we're seeing on parents and people in education who are trying to do better for our country. So I look forward to this conversation. I have a lot of questions. I really want to understand why the attacks on you. But mostly I want to understand you and where you came from and what's the type of work that you were trying to bring to help our country.
Marissa, I'd been working in education reform and really advocating for school choice, for parental empowerment to make the best choice for their children's education for 30 years before 2016, the day after the election. I got up early that day to go to Indiana to meet with a bunch of legislators and other allies fighting for policy in Indiana that was going to help kids. And while I was on the plane going down there, I received a one-sentence email from my friend Jeb Bush, the former governor of Florida, and it said, "Would you ever consider being Secretary of Education?" And until I read that sentence, that thought had never crossed my mind, even for a nanosecond. So I just kind of chuckled and showed it to my colleague who was going down for the meetings with me and put it in the back of my mind for the day. Later that day, talked with my husband and said, I got this from Jeb. What do you think? And I haven't responded yet. I think what I'm going to say is the thought has literally never crossed my mind. But if the opportunity ever did arise, how could I not consider it? And so that was how the whole thing started. And then Vice President-elect Pence was very involved in all of that. He had been talking with Jeb about possible individuals for the Department of Education. And so it all happened very quickly. And just a couple of weeks after the election, I received a call from then President-elect Trump saying, "Betsy, you're going to make a great Secretary of Education."
What did Jeb know about you that made him think that you would be the right person to be an education secretary?
Well, we had worked together for many years and served together on different boards that were advocating for these policies to support parental choice, school choice. And so I think he was thinking about individuals that would think outside of the box and go to Washington to really try to make change focused on doing the best thing for children. And he was, he was absolutely right about my desire in that. And he knew I was also unafraid of battling with the teachers' unions because we'd done it on a state-by-state basis for many, many years before that.
I'd imagine that he thought what I thought, which is you're a typical mama bear. You're super involved in your kids' education. You sat on multiple education boards and you spent your time and money for many years in education. And you're a little bit of an outsider too, because you wanted to bring in innovation into an industry that has seen so little innovation for the last 175 years.
Exactly. I mean, we're essentially doing K-12 education today almost the same as when Horace Mann and his counterparts introduced it to our country, taken from Prussia and introduced here as a way to put all kids in at the beginning of the system, put them through all of the same courses and same learnings, and turn them out the other end ready to go to work on factory lines. Well, our country's not, and our culture and our economy is not anything like that today. And yet it's fundamentally unchanged from that time. And so, looking at ways to interject innovation and creativity, there have been attempts at the state level. There have been attempts from Washington to essentially mandate that, but it's not worked to any large extent. The only way it's ever going to work is when we do have many, many, many states that have adopted education freedom policies and a marketplace gets created, because that's when the real innovation will be introduced.
I think what you've done is so amazing, because many other mama bears looked at you and said, okay, well, I may not have a degree in education, but it might even be better. I have children that I'm raising. I have a stake in the game. I want to get involved. I want to be on school boards. And this push against parents who may have not been part of the system for a long time is over. It's done with, right? We are showing up. It's our kids who are going to these schools. And we are the best representatives of our children. And the fact that they've pushed us out and made us feel insecure that we shouldn't be involved in our kids' education, those days are over. I mean, I think COVID woke up a lot of parents, but also what you did woke up a lot of parents. And this attack on you, well, Secretary Betsy DeVos does not have a master's in education and therefore she can't be Secretary of Education. My response, and I do have a master's in education, and so maybe it's fair that I would say it is, and that is, because you don't have a master's in education, because you haven't been indoctrinated, because you actually put your time, treasure, money, and your own kids in the system, I think made you better, because you better understood what was lacking, what was missing. And you tried to push for these things. And the more you tried to push to do good, the more they tried to attack you.
Yeah.
And if anybody needs to understand what has happened here and what has happened to you is they need to understand that they did not want an outsider. It's ironic to me that the union bosses, two of them, Randy Weingarten and is it Becky Pringle, neither one of them have children. And so, to push out people like you or like other parents who want to be on school boards because supposedly we don't have, education experience or expertise or the proper brainwash, that their systems have put people through, those days are over. Those days are over.
Well, you've put your finger on it, Marissa. COVID really did lay bare the failings of the system to parents who thought their children were in good schools. They may have chosen to buy a home in a neighborhood that was higher priced than they could really afford because it supposedly had a good school for their child. And yet so many of them were so disappointed by how the system handled the whole COVID navigation, and whether they were shut out for months on end, or there were mask mandates that were coming and going, or the curriculum that they saw firsthand on their dining room table that was antithetical to their family values or totally lacking in rigor and expectation. A whole host of issues really revealed themselves then. And that's what really triggered the kind of momentum we're seeing today around policy changes that for 30 some more years before that had been in the works. And some states that had adopted those policies and were much further along in being able to pivot and offer families other alternatives. But that was really the turning point when the parents from across the country saw firsthand what was actually going on and decided, it's time to really take things back into our family and have us have the power and ability to make these decisions.
We pay immense amounts in taxes to the Department of Education. And I know one of the things that you tried to do which is surprising because it was while you were running the Department of Education, you were trying to shrink its power and its budget. And of course, you were attacked for that, even though, most secretaries of education probably want more, but you wanted more for kids. Can you give me a little bit of the history of the Department of Education? How did it come about?
Sure.
What does it actually do?
Sure. Well, every year we spend about $750 billion on K-12 education. The Department of Education was founded in 1979 by then President Jimmy Carter. It was a payoff to the teachers' unions for having endorsed him in 1976 for president. It was the first time teachers' unions had gotten involved with a presidential endorsement. So to make good on his promise, he established the department in 1979. Ostensibly, the goal was to close the achievement gaps between the highest performers and the lowest performers. Now, we have spent only at the federal level over $1 trillion since 1979 specifically to do that. If you look at all of the measures around achievement gaps, not only have they not narrowed one little bit, by most measures, they've actually widened. Mm-hmm. And so here, 44 years later, we're doing the same things and we're expecting different results with more money. It's not going to happen. It hasn't happened. And that's why it's becoming clearer to people who are paying attention. We have to give the power to the families, to those who are closest to the children. And they're ultimately going to drive the difference and drive the improvements and drive achievement levels for kids.
How much influence do the teachers' unions have on the Department of Education?
Oh, they have total control of the Department of Education. I mean, the career staff that is there, most of them fought daily all of the initiatives that we were trying to take to reorient everything we did on doing the right thing for students. It is really a political arm. They have essential control over that whole federal agency, and it only ebbs and flows a bit depending on who's in the White House. And clearly during our administration, we fought that back, and we did things to upset them in many ways because we were focused on kids. We were not focused on their agenda of more resources, more power, more control over every element of education. It's just become a really, really bad equation for every child that's involved in K-12 education.
I mean, that's just insane that there are teachers' unions that actually control a government entity. I mean, how is that even legal? I mean, should the Department of Education just be, abolished?
Well, I have called for the abolishment of the Department of Education, and we actually started to try to work toward that end by presenting a couple of budgets while in office that would have block granted all of the funds that the department received appropriated by Congress back to the states and local districts to make the best decisions for the students closer to the students. Unfortunately, it didn't receive a very serious hearing in Congress. But I think today, having that conversation again, there will be a lot more support for considering ways to really devolve power and control from that entity, from that agency, much closer to the people. And I would argue the best way to do that is actually to give it, to empower families directly. The ones that you're most trying to help, the ones that were ostensibly why the department was formed in the first place, they're going to make better decisions for their children or for their local, in their local community than this agency in Washington, D.C. that is continuing to be controlled by all of those involved with the union and all of the allies.
It does explain why all of this curriculum that is coming into our schools is so, basically a left-wing agenda. I read the NEA's agenda a couple of years ago, and the topics in there were mind-boggling. I mean, you go from anything border security related, Palestinian, Israeli, packing the courts. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I read it. There were 50 pieces.
Nothing about a child's education
Correct.
and expectations of excellence and how we're going to achieve
No.
that. Nothing about that. No.
Is that why they attacked you so fiercely when you tried to bring more choice into education? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, any policy that is going to empower others to make decisions and choices that they are making as part of the system today is viewed as a threat. And so whether it's charter schools or any kind of education freedom policy, school choice policy that gives others the opportunity to make decisions, that is fought tooth and nail. You know, they've continued to have a political stranglehold over the Democrat Party, and for many years really were influencing a lot of individuals in the Republican Party. That has started to change. That's changed over the years with the work that was done before the pandemic, but it's accelerated since the exposure of the whole system during the pandemic.
I remember when I was a teacher, the unions would offer to actually drive us to the ballot boxes. Now, they wouldn't tell us exactly who to vote for, but they would make strong recommendations. They would say, well, are you sure that you are voting for somebody who is teacher friendly, that's education friendly? And we were young. We didn't really know that much. And so we would follow their ideas. And, you know, really in so many ways, they would control the way we voted. I don't understand how they can vilify the idea of choice, but they have. What are some of the things that you've heard them say about school choice and charter schools? And can you also explain what is a charter school and how is that a choice for parents?
Well, there's all kinds of arguments that they try to use depending on who the audience is, but it's, you know, whether it's privatizing public schools, whether it's, you know, introducing a certain kind of school and trying to force families into it, or just anything that in any way takes some element of control away from the system and gives it to parents or others who want something different for kids. It's viewed as the enemy and worth fighting with every fiber of their being to make sure it doesn't happen. But when we talk about the kinds of schools, the kinds of school choice and or education freedom that folks are electing today, first of all, we know that, you know, families with economic means have been able to make choices for all of history. And they might make a choice around a private faith-based school or a private school that is, much more costly to get their children into. And with the introduction of charter schools now, in Minnesota, actually by a Democrat then, in the early, I think it was right around 1990, charter schools are public schools. They're funded by the public, and the difference is that they're able to be independently operated. In other words, they're not under the control of the unions and all of their allies. Now, the unions have fought against charter schools as much as they've fought against any other kind of school choice for all of these years. And they continue to this day to fight charter schools in every state that has them, and almost every state does today. But the other forms of school choice can be, private schools, private faith-based, private, secular, non-secular schools. They could be home schools. They can be micro schools that were really concepted to a large degree during the pandemic. And they can be virtual schools or any combination thereof, really. Those are just a few examples. But with the introduction of education freedom policies, the kinds of choices that families can make are going to grow and proliferate, and parents are going to be able to really customize a child's education for him or her it's going to make such a huge difference and really unlock the potential in ways they can't by sending them just to one building assigned by their zip code.
I think the charter schools are particularly interesting because the parent is not expected to have to come up with the tuition
Mm-hmm.
that is not really affordable sometimes with the private schools. Why is there such a push against charter schools?
Well, because they're seen as a threat. Again, anything that is not under the control of the union and all of the allied organizations, they view as threatening to their future. The reality is, where there is more choice and where there are more charters and other choices to be made. And just a little note on affordability of tuition-based schools. The states that have passed policies to support parents making those choices are making those kinds of options much more available and accessible today as well. And so I think we're going to see continued growth in the number and variety of charter schools, right along with the growth of private schools and other choices that developed that parents are going to elect to have their kids take part in. And that's going to be a great thing because there's no one size fits all for any child.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think about my husband started a charter high school. It's focused on aviation, and it's a great convening idea. There are other charter schools that have focused on different things, whether performing arts or, STEM-related subjects or a whole variety of approaches. And that's all great because students then can gravitate to a place that really piques their interest and helps them to really develop their passions.
So the charter schools do receive government funds,
Mm-hmm.
but they are allowed to fire bad teachers. Is that right?
Yes, they're allowed to hire and fire. And they're allowed to, within the laws of the state, and every state has different laws governing
Mm-hmm.
charter schools. So, sometimes the regulations become more onerous than they should and don't allow charter schools to be as creative as they might be in a freer environment. I think that the introduction of universal education savings accounts is going to help change, that dynamic around charter school regulation ultimately, because parents are going to demand it. Some parents might say, my child would benefit most by essentially going to school year round with more regular, longer breaks throughout the year. But I want my child to, go to school year round. Well, today in Michigan, for example, you can't do that with a charter school because that would be contrary to Michigan law around that. I think, again, with more of the policies being introduced elsewhere, Florida, Arizona, Iowa, Nevada, Arkansas, South Carolina, just a few that have introduced these universal programs, you're going to see a lot of response to what kids actually need
Mm-hmm.
and development around that. And that's going to be a really good thing. And it's going to be a competitive advantage for the states that really do it well.
Well, I think the word competition is key here because I don't know how you run a successful business if you can't let go of employees that are not doing a great job, or if you can't hold your employees accountable. Any other business in America, if somebody does not do a great job, the management is expected to let go of them. I read somewhere that less than 3 out of 300 unionized teachers in California are let go every year.
Yes.
If you think of that percentage and you've managed anything in your life, you realize why we have such a problem. Now, I'm not saying that all teachers are bad. They're great teachers, but those great teachers are actually suffering because there are other teachers that we can't let go of. And so it is, even that alone is a reason why a charter school is better than many other public schools, because whoever is managing the charter school has the ability to put the best people in front of our children and not be held hostage, right? And we're all being held hostage by these unions who now you're also telling me own the Department of Education. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, there is very little, if any, incentive for a really great teacher working within the traditional system to excel because they're paid the same year after year, right along with those who've served as long as they have. I actually had a couple of roundtable discussions while I was in office and had teachers who had been teachers of the year in their state or their district and had had their year of recognition for that, and then gone back to their teaching roles. And very soon after going back, they quit their jobs. And I wanted to understand why. Because clearly they had been doing something well if they were recognized as teachers of the year. And I had instincts around what the reasons were. And, but it was really confirming to hear from them that, you know, when they had taken their victory lap and gone back, they had essentially received the message that, okay, you've had your day in the sun. Now it's time to get back in your classroom and just go do your thing. And, you know, we've heard enough from you. And I think about there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people like teachers like that today who have just become frustrated with a system that doesn't reward excellence on their part and that actually rewards those who are mediocre at best. And that's wrong for our kids and it's wrong for those teachers. So a teacher freedom environment, a school choice environment is going to be the best opportunity for great teachers as well, because in that equation, they become a really highly valued part of that equation, and then they'll be compensated accordingly.
I know you've done a lot of work studying why America's testing scores are in decline. I believe we're number 38 or 39 in the world, or maybe that was before COVID.
Before COVID in math, we were 38th in the world. And we're not in the top 10 in any subject area. And that was well before COVID. And I would argue, again, it's because we continue to perpetuate a system that's essentially a monopoly. Monopolies don't work. And our K-12 system is the largest monopoly we have in the United States. And it's supposed to be serving the most important asset we have for our future, which is our the rising generation, our children. And it's clear they've been doing it very poorly. And again, COVID revealed that to those who weren't really aware of it before. That's a good thing. We need to continue the momentum around the policy change that's going to really shift that equation away from the monopoly.
So how do we hold these schools accountable? There are all these initiatives, No Child Left Behind, there was Common Core. I think many people have been very upset with those initiatives. You know, we need to have some sort of way to test the schools. What would you suggest doing? And can you explain also Common Core?
Well, No Child Left Behind and then Race to the Top, which was essentially trying to incentivize the use of Common Core. Both of those were efforts at the federal level to hold schools accountable for results. And they really proved that a top-down approach doesn't work. It hasn't worked. It won't work. And the best accountability is really, again, empowered parents making decisions and choices and taking their kids out of a school that's not working for their child and putting them into a school that does work, and having transparency around and requiring it, like parents mandating, I want to know what the results for kids in your school are. What are you focused on? How do you teach? What are your methods? And what are your results? And if this is not a match for my child, then I'm going to choose something different. But having transparency around that, around what curriculum we're teaching, and really making the most local unit, the family, able to drive those decisions, will ultimately drive better results and better quality and better outcomes. And I would also argue, our orientation in K-12 learning has been one of seat time. How many days are you in school? How many hours a day are you in your seat? It's not anywhere oriented around how quickly is this child learning the concepts that he or she needs to be able to move on to the next level. If certain school, I think schools will start moving to a mastery model where if my child learns math quickly and can move on quickly, they should be able to. They should be able to go as quickly as they can to complete whatever course and then continue on. Conversely, if it takes a little longer to learn those concepts, that should be okay as well. But this seat time number of days in school is really an antiquated model for how we should be doing education. And yet that's what we continue to perpetuate today.
Right. It's also a lazy way to assess, right?
Yeah.
Because, if kids are doing math on the weekends, or if kids are athletic and they're in some team sport, why not give them credit for that, right? I know that there are some states that are looking into that. The issue of Common Core is something that I, both as a parent and as an educator, struggle with, because I do believe that there should be some basic core knowledge. Let's take civics, for example, or financial literacy. And I don't know that parents would know to demand that of a school, or even know how to look for that in a school. But if we have a state that has no general standards and every school gets to do what they want, and parents are supposed to assess whether it's worthwhile for their kids' time, that's tough too. I think part of why I think we're in this mess right now in America is because we have no shared intellectual common knowledge, where we speak the same English, but we don't actually speak the same language anymore because it's all over the place. People don't understand what America is because they're not really learning civics. We're a nation with amnesia. Yeah. How do you defend a nation that you don't understand? How do you love America if you don't understand its values? And so it's a struggle, because I agree with you. I think that a government that decides what every single school needs to learn is a problem. We want to have education freedom. And then with that said, we want to have a nation that has commonality. Yeah. And if our schools can't do that, how do we share that common knowledge with the next generation? It's not like it used to be where we all looked at the same TV in the same box, and that wasn't a good thing either, right? But now with kids listening to different things, and there's Netflix and streaming, and there is so much information out there. How do we build cultural literacy? How do we make sure that we have some common ground, that we can laugh about the same jokes because we have a better understanding of things? Yeah. We can build things together because we come from the same place. Civics, nationalism, patriotism used to do that for America. But how do we address that issue? How do we recapture the focus on the importance of knowing about our nation's founding and our founding documents, all of the founding principles, the structure of our country, the civics that sort of put that into structure, and I think those are very fair areas for states to say there's an expectation that when a student graduates from high school, they're going to know those basic things. And, some states have gone to administering the citizenship tests. And, that's one place to start. I mean, I'll bet most kids today couldn't pass those tests based on what they're learning. But I think states really addressing those in sort of broad strokes and say, these are important things that you have to learn. How you actually do them and how each child learns them can look different. I don't think we don't want to be in a situation where we say, here is your curriculum at the federal level for all of these things, because we know that if that ever was implemented that way, it would eventually get driven into a direction that none of us would be happy with or support. But again, I think that goes back to empowering families and being very transparent about what it is you're teaching in your school. Do you have a robust civics and American history curriculum that you're offering? And make sure parents, that can be a good selling point for a lot of schools to, make available. But I think you're absolutely right. We have lost that
It's very clear in the civics results, the American history results in the NAEP, the Nation's Report Card, when like 13% of high schoolers have a reasonable command of American history and civics.
Unbelievable.
And we can't have a country if we continue to perpetuate those kinds of results. So the good thing, though, is people have awakened to this, and they're not going to sit by and say it's okay for my child not to know or understand these things. And so parents are driving this and demanding it, and at the state level, legislators in many states are also saying we've got to make sure that we are clear about expectations here.
You know what else I think is very interesting about this? There is a shift in parents' focus now, where I would say 10, 20 years ago, parents' focus was mostly how do you get your kids into college? It was all about getting them into whatever top college you can. And I think many parents are starting to question whether college is even worth it.
Sure.
Once upon a time, you would interview even a grade school and a high school to find out whether they're a good roadmap into getting your kids into college. Now we're starting to ask another question, whether college is worth it. And I'm curious, what is your take on it, given how much work you've done on that side?
Certainly. I think they are rightfully asking those questions. And again, I think COVID revealed to many families and prospective students how serious higher ed institutions are about actually robust educational offerings. I think we've also seen on the part of many college campuses an intolerance around the exchange of ideas and free speech. And some of those, the exposure of some of those things has rightfully called into question that whether, that is the right pathway for students. We really highlighted the multitude of pathways that students should be considering. And there are many career options that go beyond high school that don't require a 4-year degree, but maybe a certification in a certain area or a year, doing additional education. And we need to continue to highlight those and make those more accessible. And employers also need to examine, and many of them are, the requirements for hiring into a business. For many years, a college degree was just sort of a checkpoint to even be considered for a job. Well, many businesses today are rolling those back and saying, this is really probably not a necessary nor legitimate first step or first consideration. And so the private sector is driving some of that too. But again, innovators have an opportunity to really step in beyond high school to offer other alternatives for a child's education future. And we're seeing that happen. Part of that was enabled by the accreditation reform work we did while we were in office.
Can you talk more about that?
So the accreditation has been, of course, a big thing around higher education in particular, who you're accredited by, whether you're accredited. And it has been a very incestuous relationship. We broke down some of those silos and have made it much more plausible and possible for new innovators in higher education to come and be a part of a higher education future that we, in a few years, I hope will look quite different than it did, a few years ago when we were in there.
It's very exciting because I think many employers like me and some of my other friends who are CEOs of companies, we're realizing that we're hiring people who have 4-year degrees in nothing.
Exactly.
And we're like, well, what do we do with these kids? They haven't learned anything. And I actually think, at least with a trade school, you come out with an actual trade. You know you're going to make money. You know that somebody's going to hire you. There's something that you can do with it, where the degrees that you get from universities are oftentimes not something that our society really needs.
Right.
And so why are we paying for it? And, it really ties into the whole loan forgiveness program, which society is paying for people to learn stuff that society doesn't need them to learn. And that is an understatement, because oftentimes, you go to college, or if you send your kids to college, it's like playing Russian roulette with their values. You don't even know what's going to come out of there. Yeah. So, I know the loan forgiveness program is a very big debate right now. Mm-hmm. And it sounds great to send everybody to college. But the question is, what are they coming out with?
Well, exactly. And, President Biden's attempt to write off over $500 billion in student loan debt, which of course the Supreme Court shut down. Mm-hmm. Now they're trying to find another way around it by tinkering with income-driven repayment programs. All that to say, if there is not value, mm-hmm. if the students taking out those loans cannot pay them back because they didn't get value for the education they pursued, that should be the focus. And mm-hmm. that should be what we are, discussing and debating solutions for, not writing off student loans and transferring all of that burden onto the backs of the 2 out of 3 Americans who never took out student loans, or the ones who paid back their loans faithfully. Right. And, the cost of higher education has continued to skyrocket, but there has been no governor on those costs. The federal government just keeps handing out student loans or student debt. And, since 2010, when that was federalized, you look at the cost of higher education and it's just been, a steady upward trajectory. Mm-hmm. So there are serious questions and issues here, but just saying we're going to wipe out student debt is not a solution. Mm-hmm. Because even if you said it's a really great idea to wipe out student loan debt today, what about the students who are taking out debt next year? Right. What has changed? Are we going to just continue to do that and keep shifting, the cost of that to everyone else? No, it's not a plausible solution. Right. And it's, in addition to the fact that it's not legal for a president to just, right. by the stroke of a pen.
Right. But it sounds great to give free education to everyone. It doesn't matter if they're learning things that we don't need them to learn. Who cares?
Exactly.
Right?
One of the things that we really should be looking at much more seriously, and, I had an opportunity to visit Switzerland while I was in office, where 75% of the kids in high school are in apprenticeships, in jobs that they're earning and learning at the same time. The apprenticeship model is so relevant for students today. There are so many different kinds of opportunities that they could learn from by working on the job and earning at the same time they're learning. Yet this is something that we have not really explored meaningfully in the U.S. It's to a large extent been because the unions want to control all apprenticeships. There was a small program that was put into place during our administration through the Department of Labor that would have allowed a lot more industry-recognized apprenticeship program credentials. The Biden administration wiped it right out, but I think the private sector could really drive this in a big way, because there's almost no job that students would not benefit from learning on the job while they're earning at the same time. And it could replace a lot of the formal education that is, sort of required through university and college.
Yeah, well, so many of the degrees don't really connect to something that one could apprentice for, right? That's part of the issue. And so I think that's a great idea. Are there any other worldwide models that are worth paying attention to that we can learn from?
Well, there's a lot of countries that have a lot more education freedom choices for children in their K-12 years. Yes, many more. And of course, they're the ones that are more highly performing as it relates to the rest of the world. Lots of opportunity to learn from others if you're willing to actually do that. But, the system has not been, because the system is only interested in controlling its own agenda and controlling resources and more resources.
Right. Well, we can't talk about college without talking about Title IX. Anybody that has a boy on campus is scared right now for a good reason. Can you explain Title IX, some of the work you tried to do there? Why are they attacking attacking you. I want to say us, people who believe that we need to protect kids on campus. And then where are we on this, on Title IX?
Well, Title IX was a law that was passed just over 50 years ago with the goal of ensuring that women and girls had equal access to education and education opportunities. Most of us relate Title IX to the ability of women to compete in sports and more women's teams and more a wider variety of sports. That over the years, and particularly during the Obama administration, became weaponized in a way that was dangerous for kids, frankly. They issued letters and dictates around how you had to handle matters of sexual misconduct on campus. And they basically threw out due process and said, if anyone makes a complaint about being sexually abused, that person is automatically believed, and the individual they are alleging perpetrated it does not have rights to defend him or herself and to really understand what was even being leveled against them. We went through a process to regulate around Title IX to put a more cogent, fair, reliable framework around how you handle these matters on campuses. And it gave great power to the individual who was making the complaint to say, I want to pursue a formal process and I want an investigation and all of that. Or I really just don't want to see this other person. Can I please be in different classes, or can I move in a different dorm, or make accommodations so that I don't have to encounter this person? On the flip side, the individual who was receiving on the recipient end of the complaint was ensured that they would have due process protections. They could know what's being alleged, what's the evidence. They would be able to exchange and have a hearing around it if it went to a formal investigation. And again, putting a reliable and fair process around these issues that are, very regrettable and are happening all too often on campuses, particularly college campuses. So we went through that whole process and a formal approach to the ultimate rule that we put out with, over 100,000, 140,000 different inputs in the public comment section, to which we responded to every one. And predictably, this administration has come and said, we're going to really, return it all to what the Obama administration did. And then we're going to go a few steps further. Like, we're going to define what most of us commonly know as biological sex, male and female. We're going to include any kind of identity that you decide you happen to have at any particular time. So these rules are in process yet, but they have implemented them to a large extent and are, that's why we're seeing all of the sports teams with transgender athletes, primarily biological males on female teams, and all of the implications of that. And so, you taking a step back and looking at that, you say, how can you say there's a Title IX law that gives women equal access to education and education opportunities, and then at the same time say biological males can compete on women's teams? They sort of they're mutually exclusive.
I mean, it really became such a huge thing now, Title IX, because to me, it's multiple different issues. Let's start with the issue of, you're a boy on campus and you're expected to behave in a way that politicians are not expected to behave, right? If somebody just accuses you, a girl just accuses you for sexual misconduct, then you're immediately reprimanded. You're not even allowed to know what you did wrong. You're just at fault. I mean, who would agree to that? Who would want to send their son to college knowing that, look, there are a lot of boys that do really bad things, but there are a lot of girls who will get very jealous or upset and will accuse someone of something and then might regret it. Oh yeah, he hurt my feelings, and so I made a certain claim. The girls don't even need to prove that it's true. The boys don't even have the right to find out what they're being accused of. What politician would be willing to
sign up for the same
sign
thing?
up for the same
Right.
thing?
No, and
Who's doing this?
I had several hearings again in the process of writing these rules, listening to victims, to those who had been wrongfully accused, and then also to the administrators. And the administrators not so much, but the stories from the victims and from those who are wrongfully accused were heartbreaking. And they just represented the tip of the iceberg, because these stories are happening all over the country. And, several hundred lawsuits had been filed at that time, alleging a lack of due process. So going into those cases for both the victim and the supposedly perpetrator, that it's hard for both of them, because you reopen it for the one who's made the claim.
Right.
And then for the individual who's been harmed by not having the opportunity to defend him or herself. Horrible right. situations. And so this is an issue that people have got to really stand up and say, enough of the nonsense in trying to assert a left-wing agenda, including, rewriting the definition of sex
right.
to include every different choice that an individual can make. And let's get back to a framework which, our rule actually provides, that will ensure that all individuals on college campuses or on, educational campuses will be able to have, access their education and have a reliable approach should something bad happen. The other part of the whole Title IX thing and some of the crazy stories that have resulted is the lack of free speech. So somebody can just say something in a classroom that somebody else takes the wrong way, and immediately it becomes a Title IX investigation. Well, this is just not really the way to conduct education settings, in my view, at all. So our rule really defined what sexual misconduct was, and how those would be actually defined as real issues versus a matter of free speech.
I don't know who would not want due process for their kids. But in addition to that, now this issue that you can offend someone, and it could be a sexual conduct because you say something that may not affirm their gender, and because of it, now it's a sexual assault. I mean, that's the free speech element. So if a kid says, "Oh, I want you to call me a boy, but I was born a girl," and you're refusing to do it, now it's a Title IX issue. That's basically it.
Yes, and in fact, there have been more than a few instances where even as low as middle school, kids who don't call a fellow student by their chosen pronoun, there have been Title IX investigations opened on these students.
Wow. It's really scary, really scary. The other scary thing is parents like me who have tried to join school boards, who have tried to protest in front of school boards, have been called terrorists. And the newest thing that really frightened me was that I noticed that Randy Weingarten, who is the union boss, the head of one of the largest teachers' unions in the country, is now part of a commission with the Department of Homeland Security. What do we make out of all of this? Is this another way of the unions becoming more powerful? Now they're part of Homeland Security?
Well, I think it's fair to essentially call Randy Weingarten the de facto Secretary of Education, because everything that this administration has done is oriented around the demands of the teachers union. And this notion that she can contribute in this way after how she led really dictated how the schools handled all of the COVID months
Lockdowns.
and years. This she really is de facto the head of the Department of Education, and that's evidenced by the way President Biden really gives a nod to the teachers unions at every opportunity he has.
It's unbelievable how much power they're given. What are your thoughts with regards to school safety? Why can't we have armed guards, for example, in front of schools?
Well, Marissa, after the Parkland tragedy, President Trump established a school safety commission and made me chairman of that with 3 other agency heads. And together we worked hard on putting together a very comprehensive report and list of recommendations for schools, for districts, for states to consider implementing. It was not a one-size-fits-all, this is what you must do approach, but it acknowledged that there are ways to protect children, best practices that have been deployed in different locations. And so it really was a compendium of all ways that schools could consider using to ensure their kids are protected. And I like to often say, what works in, Anchorage, Alaska is probably different than what you need in the heart of Miami. And acknowledging that geography and density and just school size and the building itself, all of those things are different. And given good tools, everybody can really work together in a local setting to ensure that kids are protected.
So what kind of tools did you come up with? And did they implement any of them? And are any of them still part of the system?
Some states, some schools, some districts have used very good recommendations and have deployed really good ways of protecting kids. Again, it really depends on the school setting itself and what is needed. In an urban setting where you have relatively few access points, it's pretty easy to protect from unwanted entrants. But, so many of these tragedies, when you peel back and understand how they happened, it really has come down to a lack of attention paid even when there were policies in place. And so really ensuring that you're regularly drilling for or reminding people of what the process and what the policies are, and really having a regular review of the plans that you have in place, and then doing necessary updates. All of those are good and helpful and useful. Some schools use armed guards, some schools don't and have other procedures. But the point being, take it, our recommendation was take this seriously. This is not something to just sort of put up on the shelf and refer to when something bad happens.
When you talk about different schools having different environments, I can't help but think about some of my friends that teach in the inner city Chicago schools, where those places are truly dangerous. I don't know that I would have the guts to even step in there. And their issue is not necessarily, if they had an armed guard, they would protect from an outsider shooting. Their issue is a daily occurrence of violence with 5th graders and 8th graders combined. And, my understanding is that a big part of why it's so dangerous in these schools is because of lack of discipline, or just the teachers and the administrators not being able to, control the culture and the violence that's within the school. And that is also tied to policy, right? Yeah. Policy that has to do with lack of discipline and quotas. Are you familiar with these environments, and do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. And, what has happened in schools we've also seen happening in cities, right? If you reduce the attention paid to, what lower level crimes, you automatically foster higher levels of crime subsequently. Right. And we're seeing it in many urban areas today. And sadly, it's often children that are the victims of it. And I mean, I think about a wonderful woman whom I had opportunity to meet and work with on more than one occasion in Washington, D.C., Anacostia area. Just a few weeks ago, the fourth student from her school this year was killed in a shooting in the neighborhood. Well, that speaks to what's going on in the District of Columbia and the lack of attention paid to keeping the citizens there safe. And so this goes well beyond school walls into many areas, systemic areas where the policies are simply not focused on the right things.
I know there are racial quotas around discipline as well.
In the Obama administration, yes, they had instituted a discipline policy from the federal level, which basically resulted in racial quotas around how many kids or who could be disciplined. We rescinded that rule because it was wrong.
It's senseless.
It's absolutely wrong. Kids need to be disciplined for infractions individually, not based on whether they're from one race or another. And teachers and administrators need to have the tools to be able to ensure that the rest of the kids in the school have an environment in which they can learn. And I had a roundtable listening to some of the horror stories because of this discipline policy, and it was really, really eye-opening to understand what the implications are for kids who are there trying to learn, and then having disruptions and not being and then the teachers not being able to do anything about it because it was a quota policy.
Yeah, the school shootings are very scary and they're horrible. And people should also pay attention to the fact that there are many schools across the United States that are dangerous on a daily basis. And I think that fact is being ignored. The fact that we have kids who go to school every single day afraid, not necessarily just from a shooting, maybe from the outside, but they're actually afraid of their peers because there is so much violence actually on campus and sex on campus.
Well, it's interesting having talked to many parents over the years where they've elected in states where there have been school choice education freedom policies. Often parents will make decisions to put their child in a different school, not necessarily because they are so much higher academically, but because it's a safe place.
Right.
And I heard it firsthand from moms and dads all over the country. Why did you choose this school? It's a safe place, and it's a school where my child's loved.
Wow, what a horrendous situation it is for so many parents who know they have to send their kid to a place that is dangerous for them and they don't have the choice to move them to another school where they could be safe. And the only reason they don't have the choice is because there's a behemoth that is holding them hostage.
Yeah, exactly. Hostages no more. The fight for education freedom and the future of the American child. Those policies are happening, and we just need to make sure they continue to grow in momentum and grow in opportunity for kids.
What can we do as parents? I mean, I'm freaked out. What can we do?
Well, I think, first of all, for those who are seeking the presidency, I think, really challenging them on what is your position regarding education and where should we be going? Many of them are calling for the abolition of the Department of Education. I think that's ultimately what needs to happen. But there are many ways to really reorient the work of that department around actually doing what's best for kids. That takes a willing Congress, a Congress that is going to actually stand up to these powerful unions and their allies. We're seeing more of that at the state level, and that's a good thing. And what can we continue to do is policies at the state level that will support parents making those decisions. And the more families that can take their children and put them where they want them to learn, that are not under the control of the unions ultimately, it's going to force change in a system that refuses to change, that is only serving its own interests. And that we've seen that in Florida to some extent. We'll see it more as more and more families make choices other than their assigned schools.
Can you give me some pragmatic advice? I have really little ones, 10 years old, 8-year-old, 5-year-olds. We're interviewing schools. My friends are interviewing schools. If we're looking for a school, most parents don't have the opportunity. We don't have education freedom everywhere.
Right.
But for those who do have education freedom, what are things to look for when finding the school that's the right match for us?
Well, I think the best thing to look for is, what are your friends and neighbors? What have their experiences been? Word of mouth is powerful, and mama bears are especially so in comparing information and comparing notes. I think it's also helpful when parents say, I really want to see the results for your school and require and request that. Schools are going to respond. The more that families have that latitude to make choices because of education freedom, the more responsive education institutions have to become in order to earn the students attending them. And I think that will be an important part of growing a strong education freedom environment, is the families that demand to see what the outcomes are. And it's also a really important place for philanthropy, because as these policies are being implemented, the more information that can be shared and the more access given to relevant and useful information when comparing and contrasting and finding that right fit, the better. And those are good areas for them to invest resources to help families find that, and to help families, frankly, maybe start schools with another, handful of families as well.
Hopefully more charter schools
more charter schools, more, homeschool cooperatives. We've seen a lot of those. And I think there's a strong move toward a return to smaller schools with multi-age students in them. And that, I think that's going to be really healthy.
Do you think it's reasonable to ask questions like, do you teach critical race theory? Do you teach gender affirming care? I mean, is it reasonable to have access to curriculum when interviewing a school?
Absolutely. I think every school should be willing to share what their curriculum is, what their educational philosophy is, and again, in an education, in a marketplace environment, that will happen because any school that's serious about existing is going to want to make sure that their families know that.
Sure. I found your book incredibly helpful, especially on a macro level. I mean, I've been an educator, so I've had a very good sense of the micro, but your book really gives a sense of why are we stuck and what are ways to move out of it. What would you recommend that parents like me read on a micro level, just to give us better sense of what to expect? What should we provide our children with? Do you have a list of favorites?
I don't have a personal list of favorite books. I mean, there's so much being written on education now, and there has been, but I like to recommend the 10th chapter, the last chapter in the book, which really does give a vision for what education can be in a freedom environment. And it really talks about 3 different, totally different settings and different, types of students geographically, and what could be for kids. And I think it helps give parents a better glimpse into what they might look forward to, because it's hard to imagine beyond what we have known without a lot of other examples. And I just think that we have so many creative, innovative people in our country many of their energies need to now focus on how they can really help improve a kid's K-12 education experience. And I believe that's going to happen as more and more states implement these policies. They're going to be there to meet that demand.
Yeah, I completely agree. Super helpful. Thank you so much for everything you do. Don't give up. The more they attack you, the more it means that you're doing a great job.
Thanks.
Really appreciate everything. Thank you, Betsy.
Thanks, Marissa.